Estate.
Good evening. I'm Bob McEwen. Welcome to the Fifth Estate. Tonight, the crimes were horrifying. And worse, they were committed by people the victims trusted most. But when they went looking for help from their church, what they found there was worse than no help at all. The Jehovah's Witnesses have a squeaky clean image, preaching door to door, recruiting converts to share in the paradise to come. And most live up to that image. But as other churches have found, no faith is free from child molesters.
It's the WatchTower pedophile database. They told me there were 23,720 people on that database.
Sounds a bit like the problems facing other religious organizations. Until that is, a victim does as Jehovah's Witness doctrine requires and reports their allegations to church elders.
The one called me and told me that I had to go in for a judgment on me because I was part of a homosexual act.
Victims say what comes next is an intimidating process, seemingly designed to keep them quiet and their attackers, church members, in good standing.
They view everything as a sin, and if it's a sin, then they can fix it.
Leave it for Jehovah, he'll bring it out.
Because their clean-cut, pious ways stand out, because they proselytize by knocking on doors, the Jehovah's Witnesses may seem even more numerous than they are, only about 6 million worldwide, 110,000 or so in Canada. But they've got a big problem. In the U.S., Britain, Canada, and elsewhere around the world, young Jehovah's Witnesses are complaining, going to court, with charges they've been sexually molested by older members of the church, fathers, stepfathers, elders, Bible teachers. Deepening their misery, they say, is the way the church handles those cases. It avoids going to the police and instead puts matters in the hands of elders, spiritual shepherds, in effect creating its own internal justice system. And victims will tell you it's a system designed to protect not the children, but the church itself. And as a result, it may shield, even encourage, dangerous pedophiles.
There was a time, growing up in rural New Hampshire, when Holly Brewer would put on her Sunday best. No nose ring, no tattoos. Just a little girl in a crisp, clean dress who learned how to read her Bible and keep quiet. Because for years, Holly's stepfather systematically, physically, and sexually abused her.
He took away my entire childhood. He absolutely took it away. And I was a very little person. And I learned how to be a big person immediately.
Holly says by the time she was 5, she knew how to please her stepfather sexually. He insisted she had to keep their secret, otherwise she'd be a bad girl, which meant she wouldn't survive Armageddon, the end of the world that's the very heart of the Jehovah's Witness faith.
If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you hear that word, your stomach stinks. It's every day. You go to bed at like 5, and if the sun sets really red, you're like, is this the day?
Jehovah's Witnesses believe that when doomsday does come, only they will be saved. And as this church video shows, they're required to spend hours going door to door, armed with the scriptures, trying to save the rest of us too.
The righteous themselves will possess the earth.
That's how Sarah Brewer, Holly's mother, first became a Jehovah's Witness.
2 nice women knocked on my door one day and started a Bible study with me. And that was my introduction to the church.
In 1979, Sarah was a single mother of 2, seeking a father for her young son and daughter. She thought she'd found a good match in Paul Berry. He became a Jehovah's Witness as well, and her new husband. But she knew she'd made a terrible mistake the very night they got married.
That was the first time he hit me.
growing up in our home was just, it was like a fire. He'd just totally throw you into the wall and bash your face in and say he didn't do it literally 2 seconds later.
There's nothing quite as devastating as watching somebody injure your children and not being able to do anything about it.
What Sarah did was what any good Jehovah's Witness is supposed to do. She went to the church elders at the Kingdom Hall for help. Spiritual shepherds, they're called.
They made me feel like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Somehow this was my fault. If I could improve myself, this would stop.
Devoted wife, devout witness. But that wasn't going to stop a child molester. Sarah says she had no idea her husband was sexually abusing Holly, but she became convinced he was abusing the daughter they had together, Holly's new little sister, Heather.
Heather experienced an extreme personality change literally overnight. She was a very docile, very shy little girl. And she became incredibly violent, incredibly self-harming.
When I was about 3, I started to throw things at my father. I would hide in closets. I would sleep in the bathtub. I started to self-mutilate. She found me stabbing myself with a screwdriver in the arm.
Sarah took her suspicions about her child back to the Kingdom Hall. Surely this time, she thought, they'd believe her and make her husband stop.
Their response was that I needed to pray more and be a better wife. That was their response.
Pray more. Over and over, Sarah was sent back to her Bible, her husband, and the home that was now a living hell. And because Paul Berry denied it, as far as the church was concerned, that was that. Sarah says it never occurred to her she could go beyond the church for help, because Jehovah's Witnesses see the outside world as the domain of Satan.
If you were a mother, would you go to Saddam Hussein for help? You need to understand that anybody outside the auspices of the Kingdom Hall is evil. This is my community, this is my world, and these are the folks that have all the answers.
They're the only friends and family that you know are fellow members of the congregational community. So they were my life.
Bill Bowen was once one of those men with all the answers.
Elders oversee all wrongdoing in the congregation. If you murder your wife, the next call is to the elders to report that and ask them what you should do next.
A witness from the day he was born, Bowen became a respected church elder in Kentucky who followed his faith with a passion. That is until the day 2 years ago, when going through some church files, he made a shocking discovery. A fellow elder had molested a child, but the church had told no one.
Any matter related to child molestation is kept absolutely confidential. Not even the man's own wife knew that he was a child molester.
But they certainly knew it here, at the Jehovah's Witness World Headquarters, the WatchTower Society in New York.
In the world of the Jehovah's Witnesses, how important is the WatchTower Society in Brooklyn, New York?
God.
What they say is interpreted as the Word of God?
It's the direct Word of God. The governing body, which is a group of 11 men, everything they say is considered the direct Word of God and cannot be challenged.
But Bill Bowen wasn't sure what to do about the case he'd discovered, so he made the first call an elder is always told to make.
Good evening, Jehovah's Witnesses.
Not to child welfare or the police, but Jehovah's Witness headquarters. He then recorded the guidance he was given by the church's legal department.
You just ask him again, now, is there anything to this? If he says no, then I would walk away from it. Yeah. Leave it for Jehovah. He'll bring it out. Yeah. But don't get yourself in a jam.
Leave it for Jehovah. According to Bill Bowen, that's the Jehovah's Witness philosophy in a nutshell. One Bowen says treats child abuse as a sin, but not necessarily a crime.
Policy is simple. Elders are required by the church to investigate and question this child about the abuse.
Are these people of any training in the investigation of sex abuse cases, in the psychology of sex abuse?
Nothing. They have nothing. All they have is a set of Bible scriptures that they can read.
In fact, church elders do have something else to guide them, called Pay Attention to Yourselves in the Flock, a kind of handbook for elders, which provides a blueprint for, among other things, how to handle allegations of wrongdoing, including sexual abuse.
So the handbook does briefly entertain the possibility that some crimes should be reported to the authorities. It squarely places the onus to investigate on church elders, telling them to question both the accuser and the accused. Some cases then go on to what's called a judicial committee to determine if the accused person is repentant and how serious a penalty might be. But from beginning to end, this handbook makes one thing perfectly clear. The church elders can take no action whatsoever unless the person who's accused confesses or there's an independent eyewitness. No confession and no witness. Case closed.
That doesn't sit well with law enforcement officers like New Hampshire Detective Sergeant Jack Zeller.
I've dealt with a lot of child abusers, and usually they don't line up two witnesses to watch them rape 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds. It usually takes the fun out of it when there are witnesses.
And with no eyewitness, if the accused person simply denies it all, according to the elder's handbook, it's the word of one brother against another. So elders are told to leave the matter in Jehovah's hands. In other words, do nothing.
Which is just what happened in New Hampshire with Paul Berry when he denied any abuse. In fact, he ended up rising through the Jehovah's Witness ranks. And there was no safe place for Holly. While her mother was at work, her stepfather would take her into the barn or to their secret spot beneath the house.
I put down some sheets. I made it look nice. I made it suitable for rape. He always called me a bitch. A little bitch. He was a very kinky person. He memorized these motions of, he's going to hold me there, then I'm going to do this to him, and then I'll be on top. He'd say things like, you're better than your mother. But it always ends with pain when you're little because you're too little. Your spaces are too little for their spaces.
Holly's only escape was in the forest behind her house, but she could never get away for long. For 6 years, Paul Berry raped and tormented her. The abuse only stopped when Holly and the rest of her family finally fled from her stepfather. Not because the church intervened, but after local school officials noticed bruises on her older brother and told authorities.
I was paid a visit by a social worker who told me that either he needed to go or they would take my kids away from me. We were homeless for a while, lived out of the car, and I had no social support whatsoever.
No support, even from her church. In fact, while Paul Berry was still a Jehovah's Witness in good standing, Sarah and her children were shunned. As far as the church was concerned, leaving her husband, even such an abusive one, meant they were doomed at Armageddon. But there was hope on the horizon for Holly. When she was a troubled 13-year-old, she met a most unlikely friend.
Delta 1 Keen will be in the downtown area.
Detective Jack Zeller, then a beat cop in Keene, New Hampshire, knew something was terribly wrong.
She would tell me that one of these days, Jack, I'm going to tell you about this thing, but it isn't now. I can't yet.
But in the next 3 years, Holly began to change and built up enough trust to finally walk into the police station and share her secrets.